welcome everybody to Entheon Biomedical's presentation. We've got Timothy Coe, Brian Jahns, and Susan Prince will be moderating the discussion. Susan has over 2 decades of experience in broadcasting and media production. She was on BNN as an on-air personality for 8 years, extensive experience with including business host on CBC and CBC Radio. Susan, I'll let you take the floor and introduce the team here.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. So what we're looking at, there's no one size fits all when it comes to psychedelic treatments. And with compounds like psilocybin and ketamine, LSD, and DMT, under the microscope, because of their massive potential to treat a range of both psychiatric and physical conditions, validating the safety and efficacy of these is really crucial. Now, Entheon Biomedical is working not only to advance DMT through its clinical trials in order to treat substance abuse, but also to develop tools and protocols to provide a deeply personal approach to psychedelic medicine. I'm Susan Prince, and today I'll be speaking to Timothy Coe, who's the CEO of Entheon Biomedical, and Brian Jahns, who's the Chief Business Officer. And let me tell you a little bit about them before we start. We take a look. Timothy Coe has a background in leading private ventures in the service sector, investor relations, retail, and technology. His passion is for the psychedelic space is shaped by firsthand knowledge of the shortcomings of the current mental health system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our conversation. Brian Jahns is described as having a storied career in leading commercialization, planning, and manufacture of scale-up efforts at a wide range of companies, including most recently ZY US Life Sciences, which might be ZY, as Vice President of Global Marketing and Trillium Therapeutics. He's successfully negotiated out licenses for several preclinical stage compounds and has honed keen interest in all factors influencing optimized patient care, including the promise of personalized medicine and psychedelic therapy. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yeah. Timothy, let's start with you and let's look at the compound itself. With many companies exploring ketamine, psilocybin, LSD, and others, why are you focusing on DMT?
Really great question. So before I say anything, I think I'd like to start by saying that some of those molecules that you mentioned are absolutely transformational. I think the early clinical research that's being done speaks to their potential to be massively transformational. The reason that we selected DMT has been, a process of selection, that appreciates and acknowledges that the psychedelics like psilocybin, ayahuasca, and longer form things like LSD have that capacity to create that really profound internal shift in psychology and emotional composition. There are some limitations to those longer form psychedelics. Psilocybin and LSD have a time of engagement that is anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. And because we're trying to create this psychedelic revolution for the purposes of treating the populations that suffer, those time limitations or time constraints to that experience pose a couple of challenges, both from a patient throughput perspective. With those long sessions, it is often difficult to see a large number of patients on a daily basis, as well as from the perspective of safety. These molecules are inherently very profound and powerful, and can be somewhat jarring to individuals. And so during that 4 to 6 hours, there is the capacity for someone to have a adverse reaction where they say, whoa, this is not what I anticipated. So with DMT, it being a very short acting molecule, we have the ability to create shorter, no less profound experiences, but also the ability to stop those experiences if they become too profound, and that person return to a functional baseline within about 15 minutes or so, and thereby enabling more safety as well as higher throughput for physicians and facilitators that are seeing patients.
Now, I talked in the introduction a little bit about your firsthand knowledge of the mental health system. Can you talk about why this is a deeply personal mission for you? Yeah,
as coincidence would have it, today actually marks the 2-year anniversary of my brother's death. My brother lost as a result of substance use disorder. So today was the day that I got that knock on my door. And though, the the day, the specific event of loss is obviously, was very difficult. The reality is that, my brother's story took shape over the course of 2 decades, during which time a lot of different therapeutic interventions were tried, from residential treatment, medication-assisted therapies like methadone and Suboxone, as well as things like psychotherapy, and institutionalizations. And the reality is that for all of the earnestness of the mental health practitioners and physicians involved, the conventional approaches to treatment are very limited in terms of their impact. And millions of people live with some sort of addiction issue and go untreated. And those lucky few that receive treatment, the efficacy rates for some of those treatments are woefully low, somewhere in the 5 to 20% range, depending on the treatment type. And so understanding that, my passion is driven by really developing tools and products that help people that suffer and need it the most in society.
And I think I can say I'm very sorry for your loss, and I'm very impressed that your way of honoring your brother's memory is in this research and in pushing this forward for other people. Brian, let's get some perspective from you as a seasoned pharmaceutical executive. Tell me about how critical clinical trials are in the process of approving DMT.
Sure, thank you. So I come at things from the perspective of not only a biopharmaceutical person, but also being a pharmacist. I'm originally trained as a hospital and community pharmacist. And so to me, the clinical data is everything. The evidence around the selection, the use, dosing of a drug, the safety, the manner in which a drug is matched to a patient, and the way the patient is treated is everything. It's of tantamount importance to the FDA, EMA, and to Health Canada. It's of incredible importance to our physicians, and at the end of the day, without robust efficacy and safety data, these molecules won't be able to make it into mainstream. And as Tim's already pointed out, and as the last year's experience with quarantine has pointed out, mental health issues are at the very forefront of what we're dealing with as a society. So I'm immensely happy to be working with an organization like Entheon and with Tim, but at the same time, we have a very high bar that we've set for ourselves in terms of demonstrating effectiveness of our compounds and of our.
And in these clinical trials, there recently was announced the clinical trials in the Netherlands. Can you tell us a little bit about those? Certainly.
Yeah, Brian, maybe you're more apt to answer this.
Well, so thank you. So the group in the Netherlands, I think, is very well positioned to do this assessment. It's essentially a first step in our drug development program, and it's almost a foundation upon which we'll do further efficacy research and also introduce new molecules and assess new molecules.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I'm going to stick with you and ask you this question because the clinical process can be long and arduous and expensive. So how do you know that you have confidence that you're working with the right molecule?
Interesting. Okay. So at the end of the day, nobody has 100% confidence that they're working with the right molecule. And it's because of that the clinical development process is so long. It's also, when done correctly, it's immensely informative. And so I look at it as it's almost like a bit of a scavenger hunt or a bit of an investigation. You're looking at the safety, the tolerability, and then the efficacy of a molecule, the way in which the molecule can be dosed, the sorts of patients that can gain benefit, and if the molecule needs to be tweaked or if you need to terminate a program and go with another program. We feel that because we are taking an integrated approach to research and an integrated approach to delivering care, we're well set up for success. By integrated, I mean there's going to be genetic testing incorporated into how we do research. There will also be biometric and biomarker testing using EEG measurements, et cetera, to aid us in the selection and the appropriate treatment of patients.
And I just winding up on this theme with you, Brian, what are the biggest challenges in getting these products through this process? And how is Entheon going to navigate that?
I actually think that's a Tim question.
All right, well, let's...
That's a tough one. Tim, can you answer that?
Totally. Absolutely. I think, very purposefully, the challenges are rooted in the things that Brian mentioned, like safety and efficacy. Ultimately, these are massively profound molecules. They have the capacity to create these hugely profound sort of perspective shifting transformations. So, in terms of judging its safety and appropriateness for specific patient classes, ultimately, the people that are proposed to be using these solutions that we create are in a very, urgent and acute state of needing help. And so safety is absolutely the necessary basis upon which we have to do our research. And so, the regulatory hurdles, though they may seem long and arduous and expensive to surmount, are there for a reason. And though we're working with a novel class of molecules, ultimately, in the eyes of the regulators, there is a basis of objectivity and empiricism that we need to adhere to. And so, though it is complex, that pathway is actually quite logically sort of envisioned and linear in a sense. And so, of course, science is inherently detail-oriented, but we have strong presumptions that DMT is both safe and effective, given the literature that we've reviewed, as well as previous data that's been collected.
And as you guys get closer to this kind of taking this to market, would you consider partnering with a larger pharmaceutical company?
Absolutely. It's, we do the nature of the research that we're doing, we're doing it to a form factor where should a pharma be interested, all of the data collection and protocol design is done in such a way that it's ultimately applicable for whether we want to carry that torch or a big pharma would, view it as something that they would like to carry on. Ultimately, our duty of care is to the individual that suffers. And so whatever we can leverage to most rapidly and broadly get that into the hands of those that are trying to help people that suffer, ultimately we want to leverage any and all opportunities in front of us.
This would be a good time then to ask you about some of the tools and technologies that you are developing to create a more personalized approach to these psychedelic treatments. Can you tell me a little bit about why this is important to explore?
There are a lot of drugs on the market currently and have been on the market for years for the treatment of depression, anxiety, etc. And uniformly, what we see across the entire mental health space is a low rate of overall efficacy or a high rate of either incomplete response, non-response, or serious adverse events. To a certain extent, that has to do with our lack of understanding of how the historically of how the brain works and how brain chemistry works. It also has to do with the fact that we're all different. Genetically, we're different. Metabolically, we're different. The underlying pathology of a patient's psychiatric or neurologic disease, while two patients may present the same with, say, anxiety or a clinical appearance of depression, their underlying neurophysiology may be very different. And yet medicine treats these patients as essentially equal and identical. And so what we seek to do is not only to hone the molecules that we will be able to bring to bear on a patient's illness, but also the genetic assessment of their underlying disease and their underlying metabolism, and also a neurophysiologic assessment of their basically their brain phenotype, how neurophysiologically their brain works. Two patients may appear clinically depressed, and by a subjective assessment by a psychiatrist appear to be both, depressed patients, but their underlying neurophysiology may be very, very different. And so we feel that, bringing new molecules to market is extremely important, but really we need also these these diagnostic and these tests to identify, better understand, and help guide the treatment of patients working together.